And I am so honored, firstly and foremost, that MaryAnne Gilmartin, you know, from MAG Partners, who has been with this event every single time it's run, and the only time it did not run was in the COVID year, because this is an important frontier that we're trying to cross in this series as SheBuilds, and the topics have varied greatly. And this is not only about helping women progress in real estate, but the topics are applicable to everybody. In fact, MaryAnne has been very insistent that it be completely inclusive and not limited. We've had many different formats, different topics. I'm very honored to have Allison Reid as our co-panelist. Fordham has been approved by New York State Education Department to offer a master's degree and related graduate certificates in hospitality. And those will be launching, God willing, in the fall. And we have also hired a new executive director, and that would be Josh Harris. Some of you may know him. If you don't, I encourage you to. He's very well connected and knows everybody and everything, and is a super nice guy. It's lucky that we found the photos of him on the internet. That's why he agreed to come to us. And since we are running late, I'm not going to say anything else other than to ask Josh, I don't know if you want to use the mic or if you want to just talk.
We're all mic'd.
You are mic'd. Excellent. Enjoy the evening. I am sure it will be enthralling and enjoyable.
Thank you so much. And thank obviously to Ruth and Anthony's staff. Obviously, without the staff, we would never execute these. So, Mary, I'd like to have a center seat. Well, good evening, everybody. I think this is always kind of the very exciting time. This is my first time getting to actually come to a SheBuilds. I've seen, obviously, the marketing on some of the past ones. So this is always, I think, a very interesting discussion where we want to have different topics. I know you guys have covered the years. I think this is the first time where we've kind of decided to take a stab at going with both that hospitality angle to real estate. Now, if you're wondering, as Anthony just said, yes, we are launching the Masters of Science in Hospitality and its associated graduate certificate. So if you're so interested or know students, we are, I believe, able to accept applications now. So that is a very live program. We knew before we could talk about it, we had to get it approved by the state, since New York likes to regulate lots of things, including graduate programs, something I'm learning more about in this role. Wonderful what your tax dollars can do. And we knew this because we were putting it, so we decided to program this, and we thought maybe we'd have it approved a lot sooner, but we literally got approved just in time. So why? I think one of the lead-offs of how I want to frame this conversation, and I'll introduce our two panelists, obviously, who are pretty well known to their own rights. We looked at, real estate is an all-encompassing field, right? I mean, everything that we physically touch, our physical built environment, the urban economics core. Obviously, we have construction management in our program. We have development as one of our programs, and of course, our core real estate program, which kind of has the finance capital market sides. Hospitality has always been, I don't know, I remember the fifth food group. Who remembers the fifth food group conversation? Well, now it's core. Hotels, hospitality is core. So this was a natural extension. So we figured we could build a program that for students and other people who really want to move, not just say into hotel operations, which is obviously a big area, but also into ownership, into asset management, into actually understanding it. So we wanted to talk about tonight the intersection of how urban development can bring in, we call it like live, work, play, right? How hospitality elements, which is beyond just hotels, it's also restaurants, into the urban environment. So MaryAnne Gilmartin, obviously I think probably many of you know with MAG Partners, as well as Allison Reid with make sure I'm saying correct, Aimbridge Hospitality, who is a very large operator. We decided there was 1,300 hotels that are in their portfolio for management, which is a lot of them, and which means she knows all those dirty little secrets that are happening, the ups and downs, because the hotel business is very interesting. So I'd like to just start out, entertainment hospitality in the urban setting. I think this is my opinion, that it's going to be one of the most interesting ways that we develop our downtowns, is that we are going to bring more of this interest. So I'd like to just ask, we'll start with MaryAnne and then go on. What do you think of the role of entertainment hospitality enterprises are in today's urban and mixed-use developments?
First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. It's nice to see everyone. It's such a warm room. I think that hospitality and entertainment will play a bigger role than it ever has in the built environment. I think the statistics really demonstrate that. The University of Toronto School of Cities did a study pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and the recovery of cities, most cities have struggled to achieve 80% of their downtown activity in their dense urban environments to get to where they were pre-pandemic. And yet there are examples, Charlotte, Houston, Jacksonville, that are over 100% of where they were pre-pandemic. And a lot of it has to do with hospitality and entertainment, and the fact that the during the day part of people's lives is no longer driving activity and placemaking. It's what happens after work, in the evenings, often late in the evenings, and when people really move toward their leisure time. And I think that's a very different condition than what we used to see, where we focus very much on the downtown areas between the 9 to 5s where companies were located. And for reasons we all know about return to work, it's just simply not going to be that way anymore. And so I have countless examples before the pandemic where it changed ground planes and skylines, and we can talk about that. But I think we're at a fairly existential moment in which entertainment and hospitality will play a bigger role in the life of cities. And for that, I'm very excited, because the thesis makes sense to me, just in terms of going into cities. Even in New York, you can't get a reservation, you can't get a ticket to a theater, and yet people are not back to the office necessarily in numbers that are past 50%. And the streets are crowded. So in that way, people are here, and they're not here to go to work. They're here to be in fellowship, they're here to be entertained, and they're here to visit New York, in which we will pierce, I think, the 65 million tourist mark in 2024. 65 million tourists.
So I spent my whole career on the hotel side, 18 months in investment banking. I have a finance background, but I've been on the brand side primarily. Now I'm with the Aimbridge third-party operator. So real estate investors, spend a lot of time with real estate investors. The brands don't own a lot of buildings anymore, so they have institutional capital or individual high net worth families that own the hotels. Hotels are more complicated. It's 24/7, 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So some real estate investors can invest in office. They get these long-term leases, things are good, they don't have to worry day to day. But there's always been an institutional capital bent for hotels, specifically in urban areas, bigger boxes, more money go into it. Cities, when you're looking at any project, you're trying to put together all the coalitions of who does what. So cities are good, hotels are good for cities brings both inbound visitors to the city and for local community. So you get, the inbound revenue, those high occupancy taxes they love. It provides entertainment for locals and for those that are coming into the city. A lot of low-wage jobs that can, you can start. There's many stories. I see some of the guys here that start as bellmen and they wind up being CEO of the company. So another thing that cities are looking for. So I think it's always been a part. There are projects though where a city wants to either solve a need. Downtown Los Angeles, closed after 5 o'clock. I actually lived down there because I was working in a hotel down there 20-something years ago when they did LA Live. And that solved a need because it got people from Los Angeles downtown, and then it allowed developers to locate housing downtown. So housing need, economy, jobs. LA Live is kind of the model. I think that's worked really well.
Interesting you said I've stayed at the JW there at LA Live. It was like that was my go-to hotel when I had to go for meetings in LA.
Yeah. So and it's in a good location. Yeah. There's been other places, DC. The Verizon Center solved a problem for a period of time. Now it's they're having some problems again. The ball teams are threatening to move out. So there's a lot of things when you're looking at downtown. To me, if it makes sense for the citizens and for all the stakeholders, the citizens, the government, the employee base, if you can figure that out, then you're probably going to have a good project. If you have one against the other there, for some reason it works for, there's some neighborhoods in Chicago, it worked for maybe 3 constituents. The neighborhoods didn't like putting a hotel there, then you're going to have a problem long term.
Interesting. You know, I just thought of something. We think about hospitality, and I think we think hotels, which is probably the largest component. Beyond, when we talk about entertainment or hospitality, I'm curious, what other things should we think about, especially for the students who might be really new to the topic? Because it's more than hotels, isn't it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Certainly, I can tell you in my career, I cut my teeth on Madame Tussauds Wax Museum on 42nd Street. And that project was an effort of New York City to keep Disney on 42nd Street when nobody really wanted to be on 42nd Street. And the deal that the city made with Disney is that it would have 2 entertainment neighbors by a date certain.
Wow.
And the city tried to do it with the state on its own. It failed. Michael Eisner was ready to pull the deal from 42nd Street, and they turned to the development community, gave us rights to about 335,000 square feet of excess retail, and said you must sign 2 entertainment tenants by this date. And inside of 90 days, we had term sheets with AMC movie theaters and Madame Tussauds. And I would say that therein is an example of saving a great user group like Disney that obviously started to really transform the way people thought about 42nd Street. We're talking about the 90s. But it was aided and abetted by a developer's ability to bring more entertainment retail to 42nd Street. People called it the Disneyfication of Times Square, but there was no ability to build office at the time. And the entertainment retail really buoyed the market in Times Square until you could build buildings like the New York Times building or all of the buildings that Durst built. That would be one example of retail entertainment transforming a neighborhood. And then, of course, I think about Barclays, which I took 10 years of my life, 35 lawsuits, 638 public meetings, who's counting, to get the ability to build an arena in Brooklyn, which was hoops, jobs, and housing. And it was a big deal because obviously there were people who just nostalgically wanted a sports team to come back to Brooklyn. There were people who wanted the jobs, and there were people that wanted the 2,432 units of affordable housing.
Sure.
But that anchor for all that was Atlantic Yards, now known as Pacific Park Brooklyn, centered around Barclays Center. Barclays Center was the linchpin, and it was also the hotbed of the controversy because all of the opposition said, if you get rid of the arena, you can sign us up. We'll sign on to the entire project. It was taken through condemnation, which is a whole other masterclass in public policy. But again, for Barclays to be built, there had to be 12 parcels aggregated, 60 landowners, just for the ability to put the arena on the corner of Flatbush and Atlantic. But I would say catalytic to the rest of the development at the confluence of 6 of the most notable neighborhoods in all of New York. And so that again changed the face of it. And I'd say today, the thing I'm proudest of, I live a half mile from the arena, is the way in which that arena has integrated itself into the community, not only by its look, because it looks with its Corten steel, it looks as if it was aged like a brownstone. But more importantly, it's just a very good neighbor to Brooklyn. And when kids are going down the street with their jerseys on, going to games, I can tell you that if Brooklyn needed a clock, like Grand Central's the clock where people meet, it is Barclays Center and the Oculus. And that's something that happened organically. And again, it's the role of community in doing that kind of development, but it's all based on entertainment and retail. I call it the whoosh moment. Religion doesn't play the same role in our lives anymore. When you go to a game, you go to a sporting event, you're all rooting. Half of you are rooting for the same thing, the other half for something else, but it's like a moment where people come together. And I think whoosh moments are really important, and that's what I think an arena does.
Whoosh.
Like a whoosh.
Yeah.
Good, Allison. Just remember, the question was, what beyond hotels, what do we define as hospitality, or like what else should we be thinking about in terms of assets?
Yeah, I mean, I think that retail, look how people are living pre and post pandemic, right? If I look at I live in Connecticut, pre-pandemic, a lot of the retail places were empty, right? There just wasn't a lot of retail. Amazon had come along. They're all full right now, and they're full with yoga studios and Pilates and Botox places and health. So right now, health and wellness is a big player. But, I think the smart developers know that things will change over time, right? When I started in the industry, everybody went out late, or hotel people, they went out late, they drank all night. That was how you knew you had made it. Now it's like everyone's got their watches on, they're telling you how many steps they walked. Things change over time. And so if you build a community knowing that will happen, and you just have your bases, your people that live in the community and your people that want to come into that community for a certain reason, you keep that, then you'll figure out the low points and the high points. You'll adapt.
And to paraphrase a bit, I think what Allison says that retail, right, which is something, I mean, the retail, it's funny, we've had the retail apocalypse. And I remember when I think it was when I sort of was coming out as a new real estate economist, it was around 2010, I was doing my PhD at the time, and some of the first like media opportunities I had were about the death of retail type questions. And I kept pushing back on, like, I think people are going to shop. And now it's interesting, now we're seeing how retail evolved, and now all of a sudden we want these items where probably half the, the mall, if anyone knew about the mall retail, the mall retailers might want some of those, but they were never to get a Pilates studio. It wasn't a win, right? But now...
Well, the big boxes are struggling now, right? Because people, it's just easier to go on Amazon and pick what you need from Walmart or Target or whatever.
But it's changing to that where it's now actually kind of an entertainment hospitality theme, right? It's not just a buy that item, go home with it. And I do want to go back, because MaryAnne, it's interesting, and it's a little bit in the different order that I came up with, but it hit me as you were talking about the 42nd Street. So I mean, my father was born in Brooklyn, grew up in Forest Hills. And I was born in Miami because New York wasn't the best place to live in the 70s, basically. As I say, why was I born in Miami? Well, because he left in the 70s. And then, and watching, so I remember visiting when you drove very quickly through Times Square, right? Or you saw a show and you hurriedly got to your car, wherever you're going, to now it's, Disney World, right? And we've look, and there's all kinds of debates and urban policy about how did New York transform itself and where is it going now? These are hot items. Is it, in your opinions, is it a fair thing to say that in many ways, hospitality or actually having an entertainment district coming in there was a large part of the catalyst that actually transformed New York, and I think at the Barclays Center, what you mentioned with the whoosh moments, transforming Brooklyn, because I mean, Brooklyn wasn't quite Brooklyn, right? For all the young students out there was a time where Brooklyn wasn't the place everyone wanted.
Yeah, as someone who I applied my craft in Brooklyn for 23 years, and the definition of success in the 80s was getting the hell out of Brooklyn, not living in Brooklyn. And now I say people move to the Upper East Side so they can save money, so they can afford to move to Brooklyn. So for those of you that didn't live it, like Mayor Koch, then mayor, 1987, 89, he would tell companies, I'm not helping you with your taxes unless you visit Brooklyn, where I'm creating the third central business district. My job was to greet them on the other side of the bridge. And they literally would come in bulletproof limousines, and they would get out of the limo, the bankers, and they would take one look around so they could say to the mayor that they went. And then they got back in the limo and they'd go back over the bridge. And developers, I mean, we were based in Brooklyn, but I always say all the developers that came to Brooklyn to build residential or retail, they wouldn't have come to Brooklyn, in the 80s if their forefathers all came from Brooklyn. But again, it was all about getting out of Brooklyn. And then Times Square was a really interesting place. And I, with one of my colleagues, Rob Willis, back in the day, I had to find someone who would take this old dank theater where it used to be a peep show. And it was part of this Madame Tussauds thing, and we had to figure out who would be there if Madame Tussauds flanked it on one end and AMC was supposed to be next to Madame Tussauds. And we were like, as you get to the Port Authority, you walk west, it gets scarier. So we picked up a theater, we rolled it down 42nd Street. We made the Guinness World Book of Records. We put it on tracks, and we rolled it down 42nd Street to anchor where AMC is today. And the reason we did that is that we were terrified at the idea that we'd have these two thriving retailers and that the square footage that we were really in it for, because we weren't making any money off of Tussauds or AMC, the 335,000 square feet was no man's land because it was across from the Port Authority. And so we did everything we could to bookend it, to prevent sheer terror from 8th Avenue, because even though ultimately that's where we built the New York Times headquarters, at the time it was such a very different experience. One last story is that I was marketing this theater. It wasn't the theater that AMC went to, it was a different theater called the Liberty Theater. And I had this great idea that we'd put a conference room table on the stage and that people would get to come in and be on a Broadway stage to have a meeting. Like, how exciting would that be? That was me in my 30s and all of my idealism, like, it would just be so great. So I rolled out a red carpet, we bought some furniture, and I set up my marketing center right on the stage of the Liberty Theater on 42nd Street. I am not kidding when I say to you, at least 3 times a week, cops, and I'd wait out in front for my prospects because, the brokers would bring people and I'd wait out in front because nobody was gonna find it. So I'd stand out in front of this old dank theater waiting for my, and cops would say to me, are you lost? Like, what are you doing here? I was alone. And I'd say, I know this sounds crazy. And I tell my mother, I know I stand on 42nd Street for a large period of times, alone waiting for people, but I promise you, I have a really good job. But it's hard to imagine that today. But like the tourists would all come by though, and they'd say, excuse me, can you tell me where 42nd Street is, Times Square? And I'd be like, well, you're standing in it. So I knew there was some hope if you gave people a reason, because they all wanted to go there. But once they got there, they would be like, this is Times Square. So I think part of it is like, it's the crossroads of the world in many ways. And you got to market to your strengths. And so these are like one of millions of real estate stories, which is why this is the most incredible business to be in. But it's hard to imagine that today.
You know, and Allison, from a hotel operator standpoint, I think that, you know, there certainly has been, I don't know if it's been a couple decades now, where a big acceptance of the mixed use development movement, right? Because there was a time when planning and zoning, they always wanted to like isolate everything, and they realized that was a bad idea. When you're looking at a hotel, let's say if you're working with a developer now, you're trying to assess it. Do you want your do you think your hotel is the anchor to the area, or it's a support? Like, how is it now that from an operator, how do you believe that when we're talking about like not something off of a highway and like maybe off in New Jersey, we're talking about a downtown. How do you position your hotel? How does that play out for you?
It really depends on the project, because some hotels, they already exist and you're just going into the space, they need excess capacity. Some hotels, the developer comes in with a vision and they say, here's our overall vision of what we want this place to be. And so we'll work with them saying, well, if you do that, the hotel's gonna suffer. And then a lot of times they want someone to own the hotel. They don't wanna own the hotel. Or they want to take out at project completion. So we'll work with them on what we think the buyers that we represent will want. So there's certain things like you've got to be on a certain floor, you got to be able to get banquets in and out. You know, you have to think about your guests, how they arrive and depart, and what they're going to do, how they're going to use it, what entrances they're going to come into. The other thing, and we have a lot of experience with this now, is mixed use, having residents and hotel guests in the same building.
In the same tower.
Yeah, and there's some things, you know, social clubs became big. That's gotten a little tough because both the residents and the hotel guests don't want the social guests there. The social guests think it's their hotel. So, you know, developers and real estate buyers will try new things. It's just square footage, and they'll try new things to try to figure out the return for the investors that are any part of that. Over time, that will change. So over time, things will change. So the best projects I've seen is people that have a backup plan, either for today or in the future. What do you do with that space if you build it out and it doesn't work, especially new models? You know, everyone wanted to be the Soho House. Soho House doesn't exist everywhere, but every developer tried. And so when it doesn't work, what do you do then? And how do you repurpose that space? You know, a lot of people are looking at, so again, I always think of, are you solving a problem or are you expanding on a need or a want where you can make money if you're solving a problem, or you know, expanding on a need or a want? Affordable housing is huge. Office space is empty. A lot of people go, but it's a tough build. A lot of buildings are very tough to convert from office to hotel or office to housing.
I'm not going to stop you from trying. But.
I'm not going to stop you from trying, but the projects get through are well thought out, that need or want will be there for a long time. Because you don't want to do that and then it doesn't work for a while, then it's very expensive to make a mistake like that.
There's one example of like not need, not want, but like trying to create a brand new place. So in Baltimore, we're part of a 235-acre master plan. The founder of Under Armour, Kevin Plank, is our partner, as is Goldman Sachs Urban Development Group. You were there. There you go.
Oh, nice.
So this was a vision. This was 235 acres of underutilized. There weren't any constituents to kick out because it was really just vacant land.
Wasn't it like an industrial port?
It was a port. Back in the day, it was in CSX. It moved paper really through Baltimore. And so Kevin Plank bought all this land. I'd say bought it. He's not even a real estate developer. He bought all this land in a way that I think a lot of real estate tycoons would think twice about. Big love for Baltimore. Under Armour as well. They're building a mass timber building there as their headquarters, but this is his family office. Because it's a public company, separation of church and state, this is all through his family office. Anyway, it's wildly ambitious, and we built a Roost extended stay product there. And when I heard about this, when you say extended stay, I think this old crappy Hyatt that couldn't make it.
Residents in, so.
Yeah, just something where they threw like some forgettable furniture and so, to see if it would work. Well, that business has transformed, and we have this beautiful product. I don't know if you saw it when you were there, but there are these young hospitality guys out of Philly, and they decided we're not going to go into big markets like New York and LA or Chicago. We're going to go to second-tier emerging cities with lots of young people, Philly, Wilmington, Detroit, Baltimore. And they design all their furniture. It's beautiful, bright, and light, and it has a kitchen in it. And so like when I go to Baltimore for this project, I stay there, and it feels like I'm going home. And I would say to you that we have more hospitality interest because the critical mass is there for extended stay. So we're being approached by more hotels, but they're all extended stay.
Yeah.
And you realize this extended stay product right now in a particular market like Baltimore, where you have, for example, all the sports teams, because they're really big on their teams, all the assets, all the athletes, when they're coming to town, they all stay there because they want kitchens and they want to be close to the arenas and the stadiums. And then you have Johns Hopkins Beds and Meds. You've got a community of people where people come in for training programs, or they're in residence and they want to be able to know they're going to be able to stay somewhere for a week, 6 months, or a year. So this extended stay product has been super surprising to me because it's very, very successful.
Yeah, and Airbnb, that was a reaction largely to Airbnb for the transient customers and others. And so extended stay used to be like 7 days. That was the guest. Now that's shrunk down, but the price they'll pay is higher. So overall economics tend to work if you can get a higher price. It's more costly to build, but again, thinking of who's going to stay there. Hospitals, great place for extended stay for obvious reasons, family recoveries. Universities, good place for extended stay. Ball teams or any entertainment. So when you think entertainment, people coming in or people staying there, extended stay is really good. And now a lot of the brands and there's a lot of creative people that are not coming from the big brands, but they'll create this and then they'll sell them to the big brands because that's proven really profitable to create a brand.
Strategy.
That's their exit strategy. And it works, right? Brands are public companies, they need to grow. So I always think like, who's getting paid? Who are they paying? What's the next? Follow the money is always a good idea, and follow the money through 2 different owners is you can really figure out what the best product is.
Unfortunately for us, or fortunately, when these guys do this, they're doing it for the management contract. Like it's all our money.
Yeah.
It's the developer sponsors money, and then they come in and they manage it and they get incentives. But, the risk is really with the developer.
The incentive is there. Yeah, the risk is with the developer, but the incentive is there.
It is a takeaway, and it just kind of occurred to me, because I do a lot of traveling for business, so I'm picking hotels, and increasingly, I think one of my killer feature, this is for a one-night stay even, is I want a refrigerator. If I get Uber Eats or whatever, I don't want to have to if you have a microwave. And so I realized like I've actually been picking probably extended stay product for single night stays more often than not because of that.
Uber Eats is a great example that fundamentally changed the landscape for hotel guests to have other places to eat. It's cheaper for the hotel owner. I almost always order Uber Eats. I never, ever get room service anymore, ever. That works. So then you got to redesign your building a little bit towards that.
It's very interesting. So and actually playing off the Baltimore angle on this is part of it, but it's going to carry into New York, just warning to everyone. But
I'm sorry, can you talk about the community benefit of the Baltimore versus the New York? That would be a great question.
Go for it. And you're actually helping to set up my next topic, so go for it.
So one of the reasons that we were drawn to Baltimore is there's a $135 million community benefits agreement. And as a developer that's devoted my career to public-private partnerships where these agreements are a fundamental part of the planning, most of the time developers spend their waking hours trying to get out of the commitments. And so if you did a postmortem on CBAs, you'd find that they often don't deliver what they promised on the outset.
Right.
The $135 million community benefits in Baltimore, Kevin Plank himself committed to 95 million of that. Wow. And so that's serious money, and there's 25 million that's been front-loaded in the communities already. So there are 7 communities in South Baltimore. that if they don't benefit from this large-scale master plan, then we've not succeeded, even if every building is filled in the 14 million square feet.
Yeah.
And so it's not just trying to create jobs and opportunities, it's going into their communities, rebuilding their community centers, helping with their retail, helping with their access to home ownership, and making sure that there are participants in the actual physical building of the project that trickle down to local minority and women-owned businesses. So I'm really proud of that CBA. Atlantic Yards had its own CBA. Mistakes were made. I mean, some of the people that were brought into the CBA in Brooklyn were simply not able to stand up their own element, their own vertical of the CBA. And so what ended up happening is this idea that a CBA should produce sustainable operations for the communities. The community should be able to, over time, run their affordable housing program, run their community center. And if they can't, you're just propping it up. And the idea is to create an ability to be self-funded and to raise money. And I would say that the kind of diligence that's important at the onset to picking your partners in the CBA, it really has a major impact in the success of those agreements. So I think Baltimore is a standout example of how to create a responsive and responsible community benefits agreement.
I think,
Thank you. Yes, I definitely agree. I have a follow-up, because this ties into a bit of our discussion with hospitality and those type of jobs. We call it the anchor tenant, everyone will view it. With the CBA or any of these agreements, obviously creating jobs that are, no offense to Under Armour, but a headquarter, that's a great thing to have for an anchor thing, but it's probably not, those aren't jobs that are accessible. But a hotel, as I think you gave the exception, someone may start literally, changing sheets and then ends up running the place, right? I love those social media posts where someone has all their badges, where they're like housekeeper, then assistant manager, then ultimately general manager is often in the progression. Do you think that within that, bringing, if you're trying to solve for actually getting better jobs, getting better economic outcomes for the residents of the community who may have often been forgotten, do you think that maybe bringing in more of these hospitality enterprises have an advantage because they're just immediate jobs, there's actual progression? Does that help you?
I more than think it, I know it. I mean, Governor Moore came to the opening of Roost for a reason, because we have a liaison in the city of Baltimore. We call up, we say we have 25 jobs, and all of those jobs are placed locally. And those jobs are jobs that we train for.
Yep.
And they're jobs in which there can be progression inside of the organization. They're among the best kinds of jobs. We built Barclays Center. We had a commitment as well, and 50% of the hires that worked at Barclays Center were from Brooklyn.
Wow.
And 30% of those were from public housing. If you read the early reviews of Barclays in 2012, without pale, there would be a description about Barclays and how happy the people who worked there were. Like, you might not have liked the food, but what you really liked was how happy the people who worked there were. And it really came down to this idea that there was so much pride that arena got built in their neighborhoods and that they were able to work there. Now, arenas, like hotels, have flexible part-time employees as well as full-time. So the numbers kind of click up pretty quickly, because on game night or during a concert, there are a lot of people working in that building. And so I think that there are extraordinary opportunities for people to get access to high-quality, high jobs.
also with the entertainment district, so I was working on a project a few years ago in Cincinnati. And Cincinnati had built out, they had a soccer stadium there. One of the guys who had run the football stadium project ran a soccer stadium. They were building some other things. And everyone's gotten smarter, because technology allows you to look at a lot of projects on a very quick time, get facts and figures. Government officials have gotten smarter because they have access to this. So there was a group of people, and they were talking about literally just changing the way you enter and exit the stadium would have material impact on the community. If it's a lot of times they would build stadiums right next to an exit on the highway because you want to just get into the game and leave, especially in places that does nothing. They never hit their job requirements or their impact to the community when a stadium is next to an exit, because people from the suburbs come in, go, and they leave. So just by changing the way you get in and out of that, you're going to be in the city longer. You're not going to want to sit through traffic. Sports people will go to a project. you're not going to sit in traffic. So you go out into the community, and all these restaurants and bars that could be single entrepreneurs will get business. And then they were figuring out how you could have something happening pretty much 3 or 4 or 5 days a week around the year. So it's not like a football stadium that's there, 8 weeks and then it's empty. Really smart. I was really impressed with the group between the developers, the city, and how well they were working together. They weren't fighting. They were, because there was now enough money to solve to attempt to solve everyone's issue that needed to be solved for.
I do have to say, and I don't know if we have any economic development professionals or officials in the room tonight, but if anyone's watching, because obviously we mostly said, sometimes there's all these great initiatives to bring in jobs, and they want high wage job, high tech, which is, they're wonderful. I'm not suggesting that's not a good thing, but when you actually are trying to have local economic impact, sports, hospitality, grants for local entrepreneurial restaurants. And I sometimes am bemused by some agencies that they don't want to do. They think it's too boring. Who wants to incentivize a hotel, right? And I do think that what these examples of this wonderful conversation is showing is that they do catalyze communities. And I think it's important, which actually leads.
And inbound travelers want that. They want a sense of place. They want a sense of community. They don't want to go to the same restaurant in the same hotel, not know what city they're in. They want to go out into their cities or communities and live like a local. That is very common.
I used to love when I would stay at that LA Light project thing. I'll be honest, I never once had the time to go buy a ticket to go see Lakers, but it was always kind of fun to see all the fans queuing up or coming out. I mean, it was an exciting environment. It actually added to the experience. And I will say, I'm wanting to get to this because it is probably the discussion of the year. Hopefully it's the year, not the decade, but the recovering of our lost downtowns, the urban doom loops. We've all seen these headlines, right? They've been there now post-COVID and continuing to some effect. I'm curious, and I'll speak to New York, but I have a feeling this is going to be probably echoed through a lot of major cities and secondary cities in the U.S. We recognize that office has challenges, right? I mean, one Vanderbilt could be wonderful and be highly successful, but there's a lot of challenged properties that are certainly older. Do you think that there might be more aggressive strategies? And we know apartment conversions are one, but those are very difficult. Do we think that there's a way we can recover some of our downtowns? It's just getting people back, whether or not it goes into the vertical penetration of the offices that might be sitting more vacant or underinvested. But is this perhaps a way that we should be programming it? And I still think about what you said with 42nd Street. It sounds like you did it, actually. I mean, is this something that we should be thinking about? Should the mayor's office be thinking about just how do I make New York a tourist destination per se, or for the locals, for the residents too? Is this bigger part of the solution we should be talking about?
So I think it's city dependent. I'll talk about New York and then I'd like to talk about DC, but in New York, the office market is a tale of two asset classes. It's a flight to quality. It's the reason why One Vanderbilt has no space and Hudson Yards is thriving. Hudson Yards is not easy to get to. It's not successful because it's located in a centrally dense area of New York City. They created a new place, but it's not convenient for New Yorkers. What it is some of the highest performing commercial buildings in our city. The average age of a New York City office building is about 88 years of age. There are 450 million square feet of office space in New York. I would say that this is when public policy matters the most. With 120 million square feet eligible for conversion, and I say that in the sense that they're in areas that people would live, that they have floor plates that lend themselves, they need zoning relief, they need height and setback relief, and they probably need an incentive to make it work. But 120 million square feet. The entire central business district of Baltimore is 14 million square feet. Our project in Baltimore is 14 million square feet. So it's like doubling down on the entire city, okay? New York City has 120 million square feet of space that could be studied and could be put into a housing initiative if there's public policy. Yeah. And the mayor calls his program the City of Yes. New York City is the city of no, as far as I'm concerned. It's a very, very difficult place to do business. It's more difficult to do what I do in New York City today than it has ever been before. It's because people resist change. The answer is no before it's maybe, and it's probably got a high likelihood of never being yes. And that's very, very difficult. So Long Island City, Queens is the hardest place to get anything done. Who would have thunk it? But the Amazon story, representative of anti-development, NIMBY.
That was such a harbinger, wasn't it?
I think it has a lot to do with the way that was executed. So I think there's a lot of blame to go around in terms of how it was done. But going to Baltimore has been somewhat cathartic as a developer, just because everybody's so open to the art of what's possible, and they want just something very basic. They don't want to be forsaken and told they were going to be promised the world and then left out in the cold. And that is a very fair request, and I can live with that all day long because we're going to do everything we possibly can. That's very different than, I don't want any change, get out of my city, get out of my neighborhood. Now again, developers have done things in communities that have earned them a reputation of breaking down the community instead of building community. I became a private developer out of a public company because I wanted to demonstrate that you can build beauty and create value for investors and partners and communities, and that those are not at odds, and that you can do it with people that look something like the cities you're building in. And that is not the way it works in New York. So imagine that very simple concept of going into a community and looking something like the community, having a conversation with people around what works and what doesn't work. That is not the way the game worked in New York City for many, many moons. And the thing I'm proudest of when I think about the 10 years, the 35 lawsuits, the $500 million in the ground with not a building to show for it when the financial crisis hit, all of those really challenging aspects of Atlantic Yards, the reality of it is a better project because of those 638 public meetings, because it was built under a microscope. Everything was done on camera, and it had hypervigilance because it was controversial. And what it meant is that we were watching our P's and Q's every single moment of the day. And again, it's very hard to do it, but it is in some ways the new world order about how you do something significant in a city that makes a difference, is lasting, and actually makes communities better.
Yeah, the difficulty, I'm reminded, I think one of the first times, MaryAnne, I remember seeing you speak, you told the story about the expense, which I approximate, my memory was like 80 million to build like one entrance to the subway or something like that.
The prow of Barclays, that beautiful subway entrance, not the system, the entrance was $72 million. Talk about having people come in different ways. This was a project that was built on transit. And so we weren't even allowed to open the arena unless we finished that entrance. And it almost didn't get finished because that's how hard infrastructure is in New York. But every time I see people pouring out of that subway to this day, I can divide the numerator by, it's a mind-boggling amount of money. But in the end of the day, that arena only worked if people took mass transit. And the idea that Flatbush was going to sink into a traffic nightmare is what the community feared. That subway and this idea that you don't ever want to drive to Barclays. You're foolish if you drive there. But that subway was a big announcement. It's like, come through mass transit. It will contribute to your experience. You pop up out of the subway, you can see the scoreboard. And that was all thoughtful and part of the experience of bringing the outside in and the inside out.
Although I have to say, when the challenge of that, when I heard that number, like said that 72, almost $80 million for it, all I could do in my head was thinking, okay, well, this project, this whole gigantic building, that was a $60 million project, like say back in Florida or something. Like it put the scale challenge, and I think I will say what scares me about where I'm extremely optimistic about New York is that it is New York, right? It is an international destination. It's an aerotropolis. If you're not familiar with this concept of aerotropolis, it's a great book by that title by an author named Greg Lindsay, who's been a good friend of mine actually, and because of New York's central location, right? I mean, you can get from here to Asia to Europe on nonstops. And because of this and everything else, we're always going to be a headquarters city. It's a great advantage. I do worry about that becoming, I know I saw Hugh Kelly here, this is the proverbial 24-hour city, right? That's how we think about New York. I worry that New York becomes the 18-hour and then the 12-hour city, and like Washington, D.C., if you're in many parts of it, right, at 5 p.m., you are in a ghost town. I've stayed in hotels, I'm like, okay, there is nothing around here. And I do worry that keeping the activity center, keeping where people want to be out for long times. And by the way, tourists, do you notice like they will stand there and gawk at Times Square at like 11 p.m. No New Yorker does that, right? I mean, so there is something that I think that keeping cities vibrant, keeping them 24 hours, I mean, that is, you got to have good restaurants. So I want to just know, is this something that I don't want to apply it just to New York. I worry more about places like San Francisco, candidly, but if we lose that, is that where we go back to the 70s? Like how important is that?
Well, San Francisco is an interesting case study because right now, I think in my opinion, we're in this like risk-on cycle. Everyone's worried about their own job, their own investors. There's a lot going on. It's like a risky time right now, right? San Francisco is interesting because I think most people in the room would say, I won't build in San Francisco, the city's in trouble. But there's an interesting thing happening with constituents in San Francisco that have come together to fix the crime, to fix the 130 councils. The mayor doesn't really have authority. All these things are happening. And so this group got together, these constituents got together that you would not think would get together. And they're slowly making progress, moving things to more center, politically wise, more center for San Francisco. But they're just more common sense. I mean, I just look at it and go, that makes sense. That makes sense for the homeless advocates, that makes sense for the business community, that makes sense for the developer. If you can line up something, if you can get people that sit in the room and they really put on the table what they're focused on and be very, very specific about what they need to get out of the meeting. Years ago, I took this negotiating seminar, and it was multiple negotiations, right? Having multiple negotiations at the same time. A lot of them was playing the developer, trying to keep the governor happy and the environmentalists and all these things. At the end of the day, the game was all about just put on the line what you really need. Let's have an open and honest conversation of how we together fix all of these issues or expand on all of these issues. I don't want to say exploit, but grow your business. Then I see the cities that will do that, institutional capital rushes in. Because they have a set
your
and see,
example
right?
because it reminds me of when Lou Rudin in the New York City fiscal crisis, got a group of unsuspecting people together and paid their real estate taxes early to save the city in a fiscal crisis. And this was an uncommon fellowship of folks between business and real estate and philanthropy.
It's hard to imagine that today, isn't it?
It is hard to imagine, but I think it's the old
happening.
pendulum because you could never imagine. I'd go to San Francisco for business. I'd come back and feel like I was in a red state by being in New York, just because in San Francisco, you made a presentation, and if you wore deodorant, you sat on one side of the room. If you didn't wear deodorant, you sat on the other side. Like, there wasn't anything that was too small.
Real?
No, there were people who were allergic to certain particular matter, including deodorant, that like sat over here, and you're at a public meeting, I'm like, this is really complicated. It's not very unpredictable to know if it's gonna go well, just because I mean, it was very difficult to predict outcomes with community groups because there was just a lot going on. And now the story you tell is kind of like, so in DC, when the Capitol Stadium was possibly going to be shuttered, the mayor asked that I be part of a task force. By the time the task force was convened, they decided to stay. So they were part of the task force, okay? But Chinatown, if you go down to DC, this is 22 million tourists a year versus our 65. It is nothing short of remarkable when you talk to the investors that put all this money into buildings pre-pandemic and no one's there. And of course, the federal government's not coming back to work. And then you have buildings like the FBI headquarters that hogs up, 10 square blocks. So there's no ground plane, there's no excitement, there's nobody back to work. What's gonna change it? Well, the Capitol Arena getting saved and having them recommit also meant that the city recommitted to investing, and everybody got in the room, and we were having an amazing conversation about what would the master plan of that area of DC need to look like to move the needle. And you had people from all over different industries coming together, and to me, that gives me hope that DC...
I'm a contrarian by nature. I just think, if everyone's selling something, I want to look at it. If it's a good company, I'll buy it. I think the cities have gotten so bad. I mean, over the last 4 years, I would say, I'll walk in and, we'll be talking to an investor about something and it says, only red states.
Yeah.
Only, and it's like a huge donor to a Democratic Party, and he's like, only red states. So, and it's because they can't get things done. That goes on long enough, and then, you know, whether it's people moving from New York or high tax, like at some point these things work themselves out, but it gets real painful before they work them out, and people lose money.
I'm going to somewhat reframe the question because I think it gets into this. I mean, this whole thing about, you know, where cities grow or if jobs are truly delinked from their headquarter location. And I don't know if anyone, I always throw out the name Dror Polig, especially for the students. He's an interesting blogger, kind of I don't know if he's an anti-office guy, but he's a futurist who tweets a lot, or if they call it Twitter, whatever they call it. And he's big on this whole knowledge center breakdown of, I'm paraphrasing his concept that the days where if you're a leading edge company, that the theory that your talent pool is only the 30 miles around a given city that you happen to have an address, be it New York or Omaha, that's short-sighted. He thinks you should be the global talent pool, which suddenly means people could be San Francisco telecommuting to New York even. And I do, my real estate brain, and this is a real estate guy, says, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. There's something about human connection. There's something about the location does matter, that where you live matters, and that you want to have some connection, at least for some part of your work. But at the same time, I look at how many Zoom meetings I have, and I go back and forth to different cities, and I realize I'm kind of living his life, and I see more companies. So I'm framing this for a reason, is that New York has always viewed itself, I think, from first industrial, right, shipping, et cetera, manufacturing. The garment district used to make actual garments. I mean, these weren't random. Meat packing district, they packed meat. It wasn't random. Now we became this knowledge center, right? This is the knowledge center hub. This is the corporate headquarter hub. My question is, for cities that are going to win, if they view themselves more as a tour, and tourists could be someone coming from New Jersey or Long Island. It doesn't have to be somebody who flew or there or took a train. If cities view themselves as a good place to visit, is that how they're going to win? Because I think of Charleston, right? I mean, Charleston is amazing in this regards, and I worry that if we don't get there, I just want to. Do you think am I way off base, or is there something to this that if we think about, is New York a city we want to visit? Is that the question we need to keep asking here? Not necessarily for the tourists, but just for our own self, for anybody.
I mean, I think the title of this panel kind of says it all: live, work, and play, right? So for a city or a community to thrive, you have to figure out who's going to live there, who's going to work there, how they're going to play there, and how that changes over time. You know, a lot of remote work is happening, right? That's clear. The way we work is different. So you know, you have different offices. People don't just sit at their desk or sit in a cube. There's think centers, whatever. Those things will evolve over time. But and I travel. I am a remote worker. I have traveled to my home offices for the past several years. So that's always going to happen. But when that happens, everyone's doing that. I just don't know how people get promoted, to be quite honest with you, in a company. If you're not there to watch what MaryAnne's doing or to have a conversation with you in the hallway, very tough for people to get promoted and to enhance their careers. So I think that will swing back too. And it has swung back, nothing like a good recession to change people's perception of what you should get right out of school and whether you should be allowed to do certain things. It used to be, I need a car and this paid for, and then it was club memberships, and now it's where you're going to work. How many days do I have to come into the office? These things evolve over time.
Yeah,
I agree with that, but I also think that we have a new model of what it means to work. And, in the 90s, because I had some ability to create my own structure, I used to say that I was on work, not at work, because I needed that flexibility to raise a family, and I was performing, and a developer eats what they kill, and I was performing, and I was able to get that flexibility. Nobody knew on Fridays that I wasn't in the office. I mean, the outside world didn't know, because you can just, plan meetings and calls. So I was an early adapter of this, and then it also helped, for example, for young women to realize I could be a developer and still have a family. I don't have to.
100%.
So I think this is really about hybrid work and flexibility, and then what does that mean for the built environment? What it means is, I don't think tourists want to come to a city where people don't want to live there, at least not a place like New York. And as somebody who just in 1 year filled up 480 units in West Chelsea at rents that are staggering, where people are paying over $5,000 a month to live in 450 square feet. I know exactly where those people are coming from. I obviously am obsessed with how they're paying the rent, so I know where their money comes from. I know who guarantees their leases. It is, in some ways, a slice of New York, right? There's a lot of people, for example, leaving the West
Can I
Coast.
pause for a second there? Just think about what she just said. Incredibly high rents, and we don't where Chelsea's located, right? It's a wonderful area, accessible, but yet we're suddenly in this area where supposedly no one's coming back to an office. Is there not a huge
Right, so people want to live in New
missing
York.
link there? That,
Yeah, they want to live in New York, because if it were true that people just wanted flexibility so they could live wherever they want, New York wouldn't be seeing these
Right.
kinds of rents and this kind of activity. Now, I'm also shilling for Baltimore, so my whole thesis is, if you lived at Baltimore, you could go to DC or New York, and the penthouse at Baltimore Peninsula, which is 4 bedrooms overlooking the water, top of the building, totally tricked out, doesn't even pierce the $5,000 a month mark. So why in God's name would you go to New York and spend all that money? Now, it's just fascinating to me, because as a young person that might have to go to DC once or twice a week,
Right.
the Baltimore culture scene, because I always say, if you want to know where the next hot place is, follow the food and follow the culture. Right? That's what happened in Brooklyn, and now it's in Queens, and Detroit's been talking about that for a long time, right? So Baltimore has a whole vibe. Like, I wouldn't live in DC. I'd live in Baltimore before I'd live in DC. But why do people live in DC or New York? Because they can go to places and have hybrid work, or not go to the office at all. And I think it has to be, what does it mean to say that a city has a life? And New York has a lot about it that draws people to it. And when you take it to what it means in the office environment, it means that we want to work differently. We do want to go to the office. But if I have solitary work where I sit in front of a computer for 6 hours, I don't really need to go to the office. But on those days where I'm in my ideation phase, or I want casual collisions with people that give me ideas, or deliberate collisions, then I'm going to the office. And guess what? That office doesn't look like the office buildings we have. It's a very different experience. Abundance of outdoor space, beautiful open communal spaces where people can create together. Always look at the architects, they're the bellwethers, because they're being hired to do this for companies, and they do it for themselves first and foremost. And you look at what architects are doing with the interior spaces, it's nothing short of remarkable. It's a place that you would want to go to work, but not to be alone. So that's how New York's going to get out of this, which is that we're going to think about work differently, and we're going to have flexible work, which, by the way, I celebrate. I don't want to go to the office 5 days a week. I never did, and I never
you
will.
want an office you could go to on any day you want.
I want to see my team, and I want to build team, and I want to lead in my office certain times of the week for certain hours of the day. And young people all want to be mentored, to your point. They all want the magic elixir. What do you have that I need to get so I can get what you have?
And that's hard.
And they get that by being around
That's
each
hard
other.
to do remotely. So I was having a conversation with some people right after COVID, private equity, and they're saying, well, why do I have to go in the office? Partners are all at their houses or not in the offices, and I'm here. And it's like, well, because the partners have earned it, first of all. And second of all, they've done their networking. Right. So your second year out of school should not be casually talking to a partner. Not that you can't, you can. It's not going to help your career. A partner's not going to go back to the desk and go, wow, this is who I've got to hire next to run this major project. It's the person that's right above you or 2 levels above you. And then I will say, on the flexible for women in development, specifically, whether it's true development or what I do is I sell management contracts or brand contracts. So we kind of play a little part in the development. It is 24/7 days a week. There is no I can't get on the phone, but there's a lot of really smart women that are trying to raise young children, and they need a flexible, and it's amazing. And it's not just young women, it's anyone who needs, whether you have a parent that's sick or you're trying to raise children or whatever, if you provide flexibility, not job sharing, but you just work different times. You can come in at 10 and get back when the kids are asleep. It's amazing how productive that is for the company. And you keep really great people around, which is so expensive to change over people. So I'm a big fan of finding different ways to work, because everyone's on their mobile now anyway. Nothing's really 9 to 5 anymore.
I have to add just sort of I feel like my data point alarm just went off that when you look at college enrollments and you look at, and I mean, as being a professor, I've even noticed even in some performance trends, I mean, women are vastly starting to, I mean, the days where the ratio of male to female enrollments, I mean, it's so going much more women to lead. And we're likely, probably for Gen Z, to be at a place where the wage gap flips. And certainly when you look at high income fields, it's going to be very different. And if you think about the impacts of that, because I mean, everything you just said about the desire for flexibility for raising a family, I do think demographically as we go forward, the work culture that, let's say New York finance crew has famously made the stay to 10 p.m. and then stay to 2 a.m. depending on where you were. I don't know if the next generation of leaders, which is going to have a much higher percentage of women in it, are going to put up with that. And
look, I'm on the board of Jeffries, and I'm on the board of Jeffries because the only way to really see the change is to make the change. And when you're in the boardroom and you can start talking about why we always have this great class of hires where it's 50-50, and these women don't make it up through the investment bank. And you go deep on that. And again, this is a firm with an amazing culture. They doubled their balance sheet during COVID. They sent their young associates Pelotons during, like they did everything right. Wow. And they doubled their balance sheet, but when it was time to come back to work, it was time to come back to work. And I liken it to if the ship's sinking and you throw the piano overboard and everybody clings to it and it's a life preserver, if you were designing a life preserver, you wouldn't use a baby grand piano as a design feature. So we did a lot in our sweatpants and it was great. Yeah. But now that it's over and we look back, we try to figure out what worked and what didn't work. And there are a lot of things that worked for people, right? But Jeffries was like, it's time to come back to work. So they have, they have a culture where they're very much in the office, but when they weren't, they figured it out and they made it work. But the women in the workforce thing, to me, it's always about at what level, because they can show me numbers and maybe they're impressive, but 5 years in, the women aren't there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's representation across the board for everyone. Studies have shown that if you have all of our clients, no matter what business you're in, are diverse, all of them. So if you're trying to figure out what your client needs, you have to have people that are making those decisions. And then I think, at least in my business, you have to provide an environment that people want to stay to get to the top. So you can have all these jobs, you can have all this representation, you can have all these people, but if you're not providing an environment that people want to stay there and grow to the top ranks, and to have that environment, you need people in the boardroom saying, I'll tell one quick story. When I first started out in this industry, I sat in a boardroom with mostly all men, and there was an hour conversation about the type of hair dryers that should go into a hotel room. So I had much longer hair. I mean, if you looked at the people on this stage and said, who should be talking about hair dryers, it's pretty obvious. It was not. And the guy that talked the most was bald. So, I was like 20 something years old, and I thought, kind of crazy. And, the right leaders in the room, he happened to be the most senior person in the room, they look around and say, who's going to give me the best advice? Yeah. The right leader would have said, I don't know anything about
Now I know why
my
wife says she always has to pack a hairdryer.
That's exactly what he said. Yeah. And one of the other women was brave enough to speak up and say, like, you guys just don't get it. And he's like, that's why my wife packs a hairdryer. But it was just, that's what I'm saying is like, if you don't, you have to have somebody, and they were all much more senior than myself and this other woman, and we kind of kept quiet for an hour until she couldn't take it anymore. And she wound up leaving the firm, to be honest with you, because she was just like this.
Sure. Yeah. And this is a good segue to what's going to be my last question, and we'll have a little bit of time for some Q&A, so obviously start thinking about your questions. We have students in the room. This will obviously be rebroadcast to prospective students, future students. What is the one takeaway or the one piece of advice you would give to that Fordham student, an undergraduate or a graduate student who is, looking at this new world of real estate hospitality for them? What would be your best advice and wisdom? I always have to ask.
I will say two things that have proven to have the most successful. It's not where you went to school. It's not where you grew up. It's none of those things. Do you have intellectual curiosity? Are you interested in the space that you're in? And do you work hard? and say yes. It's that simple. Every time we're on a panel, someone asks, how do you do this? How do you get there? It's that simple. Be curious, enjoy what you're doing, and work hard. That's the whole ball game.
Bravo, and completely agree. I would say, in addition, it's the power of people and the network. By the way, I'm a terrible networker. When I always wanted to go.
I have a hard time believing that.
No, it's easy for me now because I can do it differently. But I'd say, like, I always look at young people that work a network and stay in front of people and go to the events where they can mingle and meet people. I think, so network means a lot of things. To me, there are people that took chances on me and bet on me early on when they believed in me more than I believed in myself. And some of the mentoring relationships I had were like winning the career lottery. And those happened organically. I didn't like chase the person and say, could you please be my mentor? Like Bruce Ratner is my great mentor. MaryAnne Ty is my great mentor. But these are relationships that have been so virtuous for me. And I earned them, but I also give back in the sense that there's a mentor and mentee kind of symbiosis. And I get a lot out of the rookie factor. And I believe, I have a team that's always like, why did you agree to do this? Why did you agree to have coffee with this person? Inevitably, I will tell you, 10 years down the road, someone will say to me, 10 years ago in the bathroom at an event, I was crying because I hated my job in private equity. And you said the following to me. And I said to her, to be honest with you, I don't remember. But what you said that I said sounds like I really said that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to believe you. But that happens because it turns out it's not that big of a world. And when you do that for someone, and then someone tells you years later the impact it had on their career, and they'll tell you a story, and I'll be like, if I had just a small ability to influence that person's career, then that's a really good thing. So don't ever underestimate the power of people.
Yeah.
And it's great people that do great things. I mean, great buildings don't happen without great people.
Yeah.
That is the truth.
Remarkable.
Things do not just happen. We have a little bit of time for some Q. Gentleman in the front. Okay.
My name is Thomas Whitworth. I manage a social impact private equity real estate fund, which is the reason why I went to see your location. I worked with this woman right here who recently was a managing director at a big two investment bank. Tell you stories of being a woman. Big bank. But my question for the two.
All good, I'm sure. Exactly.
My question for you, I'm a father of two daughters, and I have a son. And my son he's a teenager, he's only 18, he's very much in the business. And my daughters only get money from me when they paint on properties. My children get nothing. I grew up poor, born addicted, Karen, bought my parents for drug addicts, put foster home, went to CUNY here at John Jay. And so everything I got, I earned. And so my question, so here's a question about you two women. I have two daughters, and how are they going to balance career, family, spouse? Because I look at two dynamic, powerful women. You I'm going to sue because your ring, glare off is blinding. It's so
Oh,
big.
sorry.
It's so
Oh,
big.
no, sorry.
It's so big. So please, if you guys, and I understand I would have never asked him that or asked any man that question. But as a father of two daughters, I want to.
And I'm a father of two daughters too, so I'm invested in
right.
this answer too.
Look, I think whether it's your daughters or your sons, once you figure out what you want to do, where your priorities lie, then I think to MaryAnne's point, you can find the people that allow you to do that. You have to work hard, but if you want to do something I have a very good friend that worked for me at different places, and I asked her to come to this new place. She's like very accomplished, Goldman Sachs, very good resume, but she's like, I got young kids and I want to be around for them. And could I work part-time? And I was like, I don't know, I'm new at this job, but yeah, let's just go for it. It's fantastic. My boss would be like, can we get more of her? Because she gives a full-time commitment, but she has the flexibility to leave when she needs to, not feel like she's shorting her kids or her husband or her parents or whatever. So to me, the advice is, look, they're smart kids. You've managed to do all of this. They have it seems like an easier beginning. So it's just like, be true to yourself, find people you want to be around and things you like, and then ask for things and know that you have to give something in return. So a flexible work schedule, someone said to me, well, why can they do it and I can't do it? It's like, because I know they can do it. I'm not sure you can do it yet. You haven't earned the right to want the same thing that this person has. And that's a big thing for the students is life isn't fair. If you put in the work and you prove that you're capable enough to be given these, I don't even call them rewards, these benefits, then you'll get them. And if you're not getting them, you're not working for the right person. And I would say be confident to say this isn't the right place for me, because you'll find another job, you'll get paid again, it will work out. So be confident in yourself is what I would say.
So I'm the mother of 3. I used to tell Bruce Ratner that if I couldn't be the kind of mother I wanted to be, that I'd be a useless professional, and that he had to help me figure out what made me tick, and understand that so that I could be unleashed. I have 2 sons and a daughter. One of my sons is here tonight, and he's my oldest, and so we could ask Devin the question. I think for me, I'm so proud of my children. I came from very little. I went to Fordham, but I mortgaged myself off to the school that gave me the most money, and I've asked Father for forgiveness for that, so I've confessed that to the Jesuits, and they know that, but that was the truth. And so I wasn't expected to go to college. My stepfather went to prison. My real father left when I was 2. And so for me, I wanted to make sure my children had grit, but I never wanted them to not know where their lunch money was, because that was what I spent most of my childhood worrying about. And so that is a very complicated balancing act, because I wanted to give them the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but at the same time, how do you keep grit? And so I think, teaching grit is I don't even know how you do that, but I must, exude grit. At the same time, demanded curiosity, hard work, and I think, if you model the kind of behavior in terms of like a very strong work ethic, but I also never missed the events in their lives that I would wake up and say in 20 years, what did I do? Right. So I had the good fortune of being in a business where I wasn't billing hours and I didn't have to stable myself to a desk. I had somebody who was willing to bet on me, and if I produced, I was able to do it on my terms. And so, but I worked hard. So the sacrifices were, I wanted to be home, put my kids to sleep, and then I would work from 11 to 2. So I did the kinds of things I think women are prepared to do so they can have dinner with their kids or drive their kids to school in the morning. So there is no way you can have it all, but I can tell you now that I have kids in my 20s. My daughter, I will tell you, is part sumo wrestler, part princess. Nobody messes with Tess, and her brother will test that. Like, she's fierce. What I say about Tess is that Tess is an unbroken me. Oh, wow. Because she has certain things that she can count on and a safety net that she will never have to worry. But at the same time, I was able to keep the sort of fire in the belly with Tess, and most of it's really not because of me. It just happened. She's an amazing daughter. So I'd say the world looks good for young women in a lot of industries in ways, and I do think the pandemic helps because of this issue of flexibility and hybrid working. I have my oldest son is an entrepreneur. I don't think he'll ever work for anyone, and it's kind of amazing because I worked for a lot of people. But that I'm now an entrepreneur, and that I can see things in Devin that I didn't have when I was his age. And so what I'm saying is, like, it's just amazing what these kids have to look forward to. In some ways, it's a very scary world, but there are opportunities and possibilities for your daughters that I think didn't exist for us.
Yeah,
so
I think grit.
You should feel good.
I think grit is a great word. We actually had a big team meeting last week, and we gave out the book called Grit. And I think for college students,
It's a great book.
For college students, you've had it, right? You had to survive COVID. There's adversity on campuses. There's stuff happening. You're worried about the job world. That's grit, getting through that. You can worry about it, then just get on with it and keep moving on. So I think it's a great word. And I recommend you all read the book.
We have a question from one of our students. I was going to direct the next question for a student, and I didn't see.
First of all, thank you both for your generosity and time. MaryAnne, you mentioned that with Atlantic Yards, the subway station was a significant capital expense, but also it had a purpose, it had a reason. And it got me thinking about the intersection of location and transportation. And another thing that it made me think about was I was back in DC, where I'm originally from, and all of my friends there, since the last time I was there, have cars now. They don't take the metro. The service is I took the questions, but I'll try to narrow it down. On one hand, I think this is for themes about women. I think transit, at the bare minimum, needs to be safe for women for it to be functional and for it to serve its purpose. So I guess, what are your thoughts about, in New York, there's a lot of discourse with the National Guard coming into the station. What does it need to keep it safe, keep it functional? And then outside of New York, that doesn't have so much of a reliance on transit, where cars are more functional. I guess this leads into a thought about, one, what do they do about their transit situation? I know in Baltimore as an example. And then also talking about this, what are your thoughts on car-free spaces? I know there are always these reports when they do shut down the streets, Berry Street in Williamsburg, or car-free Sundays that they do sometimes, the economic impact of that. Is that on your radar at all? Is that kind of feed into this?
Yeah.
My question also has to do with the congestion pricing, and also curious about what your thoughts on hospitality. So it just totally doesn't know about it, and that's what I thought.
And that was like one of the topics I didn't get to that I'm glad you guys asked about.
It's like a syllabus for a whole class, but
Yeah.
I'll do it very quickly and then I'll pass it off too. So I have sworn off the roads. I mean, it's horrible in New York. So I'm on the subway a lot and it is not pleasant, but necessary. I think my son is one of the top 1% city bikers in New York. He doesn't use the subway and he goes everywhere by bike. And that works for some people, it doesn't work for others. I wish he'd wear a helmet, but that's a whole other conversation. In the end of the day, you can get around in many, many different ways. I'd say like the car thing, the reason I like congestion pricing is it can't get worse. So if somebody wants to go into New York, like into the city from Brooklyn, then let them pay a premium if they're gonna drive. I just get there's just too many cars on the road. So our mass transit system is functioning. It needs to be safe. 1,000% agree. Not just for women. I mean, it is just foreboding to be on the subways at certain times. And we have the modern miracle. Like when it works, it's a modern miracle. So I think that in cities like Baltimore, they have water, right? They're surrounded by water, but they don't have great bikeways and roadways. My daughter's in Atlanta at Emory. I can't believe how terrible that city is for bikes. You lose your life if you try to ride your bike from one side of town to the other. And so New York, in some ways, we had Jeanette Sadakhan, and she was all about the bike lanes, and it caused a lot of agita with people in cars. But in the end of the day, we have a great network of bike lanes, and so it's not just the subways anymore, and the cars just simply don't work in New York. And so I do think this idea of encouraging people not to drive or penalizing people for driving, I'm a big fan of it because I think the quality of life in this city is severely impacted, not just by traffic, but by the noise associated with the cars and the trucks that go along with the traffic. So I think you could get a study that says congestion pricing didn't work or it did work in London, or everybody's got a view. I say let's try it. And I'm sorry that it's gonna create premiums for people who need to drive, but like the Ubers and the cars that should be exempt, it'll happen. I think it should happen because we need relief. Our transit system needs investment. We could have a whole class on infrastructure and the problems with the fact that the investment hasn't been there in infrastructure. But cities like Baltimore they drive everywhere in Baltimore. But in part because the taxi system is antiquated. The inner harbor, you can only go 6 knots, so you can't use the inner harbor to get from one part of the city to another where the Patapsco River is. So I think you have to work on what is the city able to do. Baltimore could have amazing bike paths and greenways, and they don't. So I think there's a lot of room, even for cities that are never gonna have an underground transit system.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know as much of it. We don't focus that much on it. I think that as I travel around the world, the United States leads in many, many things. This is not one of them. And I think it's a combination of too much argument, and other countries have really done amazing things with their infrastructure. Sometimes because they can do it, and some countries they just mandate it and it's done. But I think a lot of smarter people than me need to focus on this and figure it out, and they need to, like, safety, it's basic things, safety, affordability. If my only one thing is on I commute in from Connecticut. I usually drive because it's easier to come down the West Side Highway. I'm fine paying the price, but if if some people that work in a hotel and make X dollars an hour have that choice. They can't come from Connecticut. It's too hard to get to the west side from Connecticut, basically, is the problem. It would have taken me 2 hours to get here, taking the train, as opposed to driving to 45 minutes. So I don't know if the
There's an
city's
equity
doing
concern,
something. There's an
yeah.
equity issue, definitely, that I think they need to look into.
I have to, I had this thought when earlier, I was going to say, I was going to make like almost a little bit of a commercial for Baltimore, so I'll do it here, and I guess I'm going to slam New York at the same time. But one of the, I remember, I guess it was now well over a year ago, when I was living in Westchester, and one of a good friend who is now out in New Jersey, we were trying to coordinate a time to meet. What days we're both coming into the city, finding a location, because I'm coming into Grand Central, he's coming into Penn Station. And after so many different misses and things, we said, let's just do Zoom. And we're realizing that it wasn't, there was no other way to do it. And that's when and I contrast to my experiences in other cities, and I think I'm assume this is true for Baltimore. I know it's true for a lot of the Florida cities I spend time in, where, in 30 minutes, you can get from one side of the whole town to the other. Even in rush hour, it's not that much worse. And let's be honest, America has been very much of a car-driven city. So I think one of the challenges for New York that actually has a subway system, right? I mean, that actually has transit in places that we built around, that if we break or allow our transit or our commuting time, and it just hit me that New York it is harder to get from point A to point B, maybe with the exception of biking, which has its own limitations. And I do think that is a big impediment to growth. But then on the flip side, when I think about a city like Baltimore, I think if you were working at that Under Armour, if you haven't seen if you don't know what a mass timber building is, they're beautiful and very efficient and wonderful. But they probably can get in and out. They can drive, or they can live out in suburban Maryland. They can, and you realize that there's a quality of life effect just being able to just jump in your car or whatever you want to motor commute to get where you want to go. And I feel that it is one of those challenges that we need to be more honest about. And I think that was the question. Looking at the clock, we really have hit time. This has been, I cannot thank you both enough.
Thank you.
This is a phenomenal discussion, and thank you so much for coming. And to the students who are in the room, a big hand to you, because if you're in the room, you're following their advice. And thank you all for coming. And Dean Davidson, thank you so much for helping host.
Thank you.
Right. And also we have our gala on the June 18th, our Building Futures Gala. So hopefully you're all on our list. That's one of our big events of the year. So we hope to all see you there. Thank you.